All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about the fascinating and sometimes pretty intense world of psychological research. We're going to break down the super important rules that keep science both groundbreaking and, safe for everyone involved.
And really, it all comes down to this one huge question. How do we push the boundaries of what we know about the human mind without crossing the line and hurting the very people we're trying to understand? It's a tough balance, and the answers we have today were learned the hard way.
I mean, just listen to this quote about the famous Stanford Prison Experiment. It's a chilling reminder that without a strong ethical compass, the search for knowledge can go off the rails fast. It shows us that these rules aren't just suggestions, they're necessities.
So to really get why we have the rules we do now, we've got to take a look back. We need to explore research's risky past, where the thirst for knowledge sometimes came at a really high human cost.
Yeah. For a long time, the excitement of discovery often totally overshadowed the well-being of the people in the studies. This led to some, frankly, shocking experiments, and it forced the entire scientific community to say, okay, stop. We need a formal system to make sure this never, ever happens again.
And the front line of that system? Well, meet the research watchdogs, the Institutional Review Board, or as you hear it called, the IRB. These are the guardians at the gate of ethical research.
So what is an IRB? It's basically a committee, a mix of scientists, ethicists, and even people from the local community, and they have one critical job: to vet every single research proposal and make sure it's ethically solid before a single participant is recruited.
And their process, it is super thorough. A researcher submits their idea, and the IRB pores over it, looking for any potential risks. They'll give feedback, demand revisions, and only when they are 100% satisfied that it's safe will they give that final green light. And get this, their job isn't even done then. They keep an eye on the study as it happens. So this brings us to the actual rules themselves. We're going to walk through 5 core principles. And here's the powerful part. These aren't just rules pulled out of a textbook. Every single one was born from a real and often controversial moment in history. They're lessons learned from real people's experiences.
Let's start with one you've probably heard of. It's Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment from back in 1971. The idea was to see what happens when you give people power. They took a group of college students and randomly made them either guards or prisoners, and the result was, honestly, terrifying. The guards became cruel and abusive, and the prisoners had serious psychological breakdowns. The whole thing was supposed to last 2 weeks. They had to shut it down after just 6 days. And that disaster gave us our first and maybe most important principle: protection from harm. It is the researcher's absolute, non-negotiable duty to make sure participants are not hurt, physically or psychologically, period. Okay, next up, we have to talk about one of the most shameful moments in research history, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study. For 40 years, researchers studied the effects of untreated syphilis in African American men. The men had no idea what the study was truly about. They were never told they had syphilis. They were never given treatment, even after penicillin was discovered as a cure. The harm was catastrophic. So what came out of this awful tragedy is a principle that's now central to everything: informed consent. You have the right to know exactly what you're signing up for: the purpose, the risks, the benefits, everything. And you have the right to walk away at any time for any reason.
And there's a really important little detail here. Informed consent is for adults who can make their own legal decisions. But for kids or others who can't legally consent, we need something called informed assent. That means getting their agreement in a way they can understand, plus getting full consent from their parent or guardian. Both have to happen.
Principle number 3 is a big one: confidentiality. It's the researcher's promise to protect your identity and your data. Think of it like a vault. What you share in a study is anonymized, and it has to stay in that study. Now this next case, it gets into a real ethical gray area. Let's talk about Stanley Milgram's famous experiments on obedience. In this study, Milgram tricked people into thinking they were giving painful, even dangerous, electric shocks to another person. Now, they weren't really shocking anyone, but the stress and guilt they felt was absolutely real. This brings up the tricky issue of deception. Sometimes, telling people the real point of a study would change their behavior. So, deception is allowed, but only if it's scientifically essential, totally justified, and causes no lasting harm.
And finally, we have the story of little Albert from 1920.
This one is a powerful lesson in why how you end a study is just as critical as how you start it.
So, researchers conditioned a baby boy, Albert, to be terrified of a harmless white rat. But then, they just sent him on his way. They never reversed the conditioning. He left the study with a brand new fear they had created. And that is exactly why our fifth principle, debriefing, is so non-negotiable. After the study is over, you have to tell the participant everything, clear up any deception, and make sure they leave feeling just as good as they did when they arrived.
Okay, wow, that was a lot, I know. Some pretty heavy history there. So how do we pull this all together and actually remember it? Well, let's try a simple checklist. It's easy to remember if you just think of the word ethics. E is for everyone's safety comes first. T is for tell them what to expect. H is for have a guardian's permission. I is for IRB approval is a must. C is for confidentiality. And S is for share the real purpose at the end. It's a pretty handy way to keep all the big ideas straight. So after all that, why should you care about any of this? How does this connect to our world right now?
Here's the most important takeaway. These rules are not just dusty old stories from a textbook. They are active, living principles that are in place right now to protect you, me, and anyone who might take part in a study tomorrow. They're what ensures our search for knowledge is always, always humane.
And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. As science moves forward with things like AI, genetic editing, and brain implants, what new ethical challenges are we going to face? The principles we talked about today are our foundation, but the conversation about how to explore the world ethically, well, that conversation is never really over.